Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have John Epperson.
Hello, everybody.
We also have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
So we were discussing before the show, and we decided to talk about attachment uploads and like ActionText. So just to give a little bit of context, I've been working on Top End Devs. You know, I got the podcast pages all basically handled. The other thing I guess we could talk about is just permissions and what a giant pain in the rear that is. Don't you wish that Rails came with a component library that would plug in the widgets, charts, graphs, and other things you need to build a solid user interface? And wouldn't it be even better if it looked great and was easy to integrate? Well, I have great news, folks. I found it. Avo provides all these things along with authentication, advanced search, menu editors, grid views, and a ton more. Plus, there's an open source version that gives a ton of stuff for free. Just go to avo.cool, that's avo.cool, to see what they offer and give it a try. I'm so excited to have an option that works out of the box, doing more than the basic CRUD operations, and I'm thrilled that I don't have to buy an admin theme and then convert their stuff to Rails views. This is built for Rails by a Rails developer, and it's awesome. Go check it out at avo.cool. Those are kinds of things I've been dealing with lately, is just uploads and text and stuff like that. So to give a little bit of context to the problem space that I've been dealing with. So with the podcasts, one thing we need is kind of the rich text stuff for show notes, right? And so we want people to be able to go in, people being people on my team. I'm going to open it up to the hosts as well so they can go edit show notes and transcripts and stuff like that. Yeah, just having that sort of rich text flavor to it so that we can add bullet points. I mean, it's basic stuff, bullet points, headers, you know, to the different segments that we have in the show, picks. And then also the other part of that is uploading other things that pertain to the episode, like the audio files. Or one thing that you can do with podcasts that I don't see a lot of people doing. The only show that I've seen that do this that does it on a regular basis is No Agenda, which is kind of a political show, but they do things differently, and it's really an interesting kind of case study on how to do podcasting in a little different way. They post new album artwork every week for their episode, right? And so that's fascinating to look at. And so just kind of figuring that out, and then it's like, okay, you know, I need some of this to go to the cloud storage that we're using. Some of it needs to go to the media host for the podcast. And then just looking at how it all manages it with the text and with ActiveStorage and things like that. So anyway, that's kind of been the space I've been working in over the last couple of weeks. Now I'm like up to my elbows in Stripe. Let's talk about uploads here for a minute. So I'm curious what you all have experienced with ActiveStorage and or attachment management.
So I have, the first one that I actually remember is Paperclip.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we used something like prior to Paperclip, but I don't remember it at all. So I have no idea what it was. And that was like I started in like 2007. That was also like my first job straight out of college. Actually, I was still in college at the time. I was, you know, answering phones, and then I was like just asked to like do some Rails stuff on the side. So I was learning a lot about like jobs and things like that. So there's definitely some things from those days that I don't remember very well. But I do remember when we switched over to Paperclip, and I remember thinking that, wow, this was like really awesome and easy to use. I remember using Carrier Wave on a couple of projects. I remember not liking it and just kind of like pushing Paperclip past its limit. I remember when Refile came around, and I was like literally trying to convince everyone to use Refile. And then everyone, at least in my local Ruby meetup group and stuff, right? Yeah, and then ActiveStorage came out, and I've been on that train ever since. I just think it had the same feel that Paperclip did back in the day, which was like, this is a large improvement over everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when it came out, and I wasn't even convinced. Like the patch notes came out, and I was like, oh, it's fine. We've got Paperclip and Carrier Wave and Refile, and I was like, whatever, it's fine. Like, there's not going to be that much use. And then I just decided to use it on a pet project, and I was like, this is way easier to configure.
Yep.
And that was all it took to convince
How
me.
about you, Valentino?
Yeah, you know, I started with was it Rick Olson's attachment foo way back when. And, you know, it's just when you wanted to get that file uploader button from the browser to actually store something. And it's, you know, what you need and want to do with files now has kind of transformed since then, right? Like Paperclip kind of introduced the, post processing and like, serving things up in different versions, and some of the other ones, Shrine and Carrier Wave, Refile, that they all kind of add their own different takes to that, post processing, what you can accept, kind of adding front end stuff. And then even I used to use one called Dragonfly, which was a way to just like, automatically serve up images of different sizes. So it's kind of like front end focused. So you would give you an API to resize images, kind of like Cloudinary, like Cloudinary's API if you've used that. And it was pretty cool. And now we have ActiveStorage, and it kind of like is bundling everything, right? And so with that comes a lot, some complexity, but I think for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, where you just configure ActiveStorage and tell it where and how you want it to store. And even like setting up on S3 is really easy. You just give it the 3 environment variables or whatever it is that it needs, and it just automatically sends them over to AWS, right? Which is pretty great. It's interesting. I don't know if you guys have used kind of the more advanced features of, ActiveStorage. I'm curious to hear if you use some of the transformation stuff that they have, or any of the other more configurable stuff, because that stuff is really cool. And I haven't had the chance to dive into that yet, but I'm curious how it's fared.
It's great. So I'm using it for like UPS and FedEx labels in a particular project. And so the issue is that UPS and FedEx labels have to be printed like exactly, except that in this particular project, I'm actually pulling like the FedEx labels from FedEx, and they don't send the same size label every time, depending on which API you hit. And sometimes sometimes the same API sends a different sized image. So I've definitely had to normalize my images, and Rails's transformation stuff actually just took care of that for me. It was nice.
I'm just going to jump in here. You all kind of shared your background with attachments, and then I'll talk a little bit about the variant stuff on ActiveStorage. Yeah, I mean, I got in. I think I played with Axe as attachment way back in the day, and then Rick Olson picked it up, and attachment foo was easier, but still a giant pain in the neck. Right. It's interesting how technology kind of advances, and it's like, wow, this is so nice. And then you think back on it now and you're like, that was a giant pain, right? And then you move on to the next technology and you're like, wow, this is so nice. And then you think back and it's, oh, that last thing was such a giant pain, even though you remember that you really liked it when it came out. And so Paperclip and Carrier Wave, I resisted Carrier Wave for a long time just because I was used to Paperclip and I knew what I was doing. But eventually I tried it out and I was like, oh, this is nice, right? And so, kind of made the move. I have to tell you that configuring fog still gives me nightmares. So, just put that out there. But yeah, so I was setting up top-end devs and, had a couple of things shift on me a little bit. And so I was building out the course section, and anyway, I wound up building in the podcast portal instead, just because of pricing changes and things like that. And figured I just won't pay somebody, every month to host all the stuff. So I upload the files, and I was like, well, I'm just going to see, what ActiveStorage is about. And holy cow, was it easier. It was way easier than anything else I had tried. Now, I haven't tried Shrine. I haven't tried Dragonfly. I haven't tried Refile either. So, just putting those out there, if you're looking for my basis of what I'm comparing it against, I basically went from Carrier Wave to ActiveStorage, and I've been so happy with it. It is so easy. I really like the approach that it has, where you can essentially just say it has one or many attached files. You tell it what it is, and that's super easy. And then, for the rest of it, you just call .variant on it, and it just kind of does its thing, right? It has a lot of options on it, but mostly I've just done a variant where I tell it what file format and what size I want, and then tell it either to, resize it one way or the other. And I've been pretty happy with it, and it's also pretty straightforward as far as how to use it. So for the most part, I've been pretty delighted with it, and doesn't take a whole lot of deep thought for me. It's just, oh, okay, I'm just going to do this. One other thing that I will point out is that I'm not using S3. I'm using something else that has an S3 compatible API. I'm using DigitalOcean. And so their block storage, you set it up kind of the same way, but the directions weren't super clear as to what variable to put where. And so it took me a little bit of trial and error to get it together, but it wasn't bad. So yeah, I just used the S3 gem for it and then just tell it, go use DigitalOcean server instead. And that works great. I've been pretty happy with that too. So I'm going to put that out there. The other thing is, and this is just kind of a gee whiz thing. So for DigitalOcean stored stuff like I'm using it for the artwork for the shows and, avatar images for users and things like that, right? But if you've been in the podcasting space for a while and you've posted your own podcast, you usually have a separate storage for those, right? Because they're rather large files. They get downloaded thousands of times and you don't really want to pay the bandwidth and storage for that stuff. And so you go find somebody that, basically charges all the little shows the same amount as they charge the big shows. And you just pay a monthly fee for that. So I have a separate storage just for the media. And these are all forward-thinking companies that use this highly secure and highly well thought out protocol called FTP to put their files on their server, right? And so I effectively get the upload and then I just stream it through FTP onto the media server, which is real clunky, but it works, right? And then my FTP credentials are just saved as settings on the server. And, the nice thing about that is I don't have to worry about whether or not it's secure from my machine because the upload is secure, right? Over HTTPS, it's as secure as the browser is, I guess. And then from there, putting it onto the file storage through FTP, that just happens directly from the machine that I'm uploading it to. So that's pretty nice as well. And it's all worked pretty seamlessly. I will also say that one thing that's nice is that with Carrier Wave and Paperclip and some of the other ones, you actually have to migrate in your string file for the location of the file that you need to use. And with ActiveStorage, one thing that's nice is that it just has one database for all of your files. So all you have to do is put in has one attached or has many attached, and it does all the magic for you. And that's real nice because I can just deploy my code and not have to worry about whether or not I have to migrate or anything like that. So anyway, that's kind of been my experience with it. I don't know if you guys have specific questions about what I've done or specific things to add from what you've done. But if you want to chime in.
I presume we're talking SFTP at least, right?
That'd
Not
be
just,
nice. No. Yeah.
All right. Well, whatever.
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't looked at like Transistor. Actually, I have. I have used Transistor. I've used Fireside. They just make you do a web upload for their files. But Libsyn, Blueberry, some of the other file storage ones out there, you can use FTP. The nice thing about it is if you have a decent FTP program, it's rather convenient to just, push all your files over as opposed to uploading them one at a time through the browser. What you get in convenience, you definitely lack in security. So
I feel like maybe it's not so bad because, you want your podcasts to get out to the public anyway. So if someone man in the middles you, I guess it's not the worst.
The issue is that, and your music file, your MP3s are typically not really executable, right? So unless there's some exploit in the player or something weird, I've seen stuff, but it's pushed in a different way. The issue is if they capture your credentials, then they can push other stuff up the server and serve it out wherever they want.
That is true. Yep.
I mean, speaking to the MP3s are not executable. I mean, wasn't there a JPEG?
Oh, there have been exploits
related thing where it was allowing code execution from an image, right?
Yeah, and MP3s have metadata too, I mean, that's why I'm saying, depending on the player and how it all goes together, maybe. But when I grow up and play all the spy games, I want to put all the information I've gathered into metadata. I'll just encrypt it and stick it in there.
I was going to say, speaking more to active storage, One thing I really like about it is the CDN support, so that you can kind of wrap your own CDN preference with whatever you're using to store it on the back end. I don't know if anybody has played with that, but it's super easy and convenient.
I remember 3 or 4 times spending like a day or overnight, like trying to figure out why my, why my settings weren't working for my CDN, and then Cores came out, and like Cores was always mucking with everything for me.
Oh man.
And like, yeah, so I know that I spent tons of time like getting things working. Sometimes I totally had like a site that was running just fine, and I really hadn't been paying attention to, some, I guess, changes in how browsers are handling core stuff, and I totally had to go fix some stuff like 2 months ago on an already running site. It's a pain, and I have really liked that the stuff that's on ActiveStorage, like I don't have like those 3, I don't know, there was like some Cores gem that I downloaded and like something else, like, and I had to like get like multiple things going to get it working. That stuff was super brittle. The ActiveStorage stuff, not brittle at all. It's awesome. I didn't have to fix any of the ActiveStorage stuff in this case. I actually had to fix my AWS configuration, or my S3 configuration, right. I guess.
Which is a whole nother can of worms, isn't it?
Yes. I just wish this is where, I wish they had a sane default. The thing that I like about Rails, right, gives us that sane default thing. That's like, but in AWS, they just give you a blank box and they're like, go figure it out yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
Here's some docs which have nothing specific in them. So, yeah.
Yeah, go watch a tutorial on YouTube or something.
Yep. I mean, that's how I figured it out, but
yeah, me too.
They leave you hanging pretty hard.
Yeah, I've looked at some of the CDN stuff, but I haven't done much with it. I think eventually I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to have to, just because, as I start putting more stuff out there, I'm just, and we already get. It's funny because I'm using Sentry for my bug tracking, and don't tell Raygun, there, one of our sponsors. Anyway, but I pushed up a bit of code that it threw an error in application HTML ERB. And so I got a pretty good idea of what my traffic is day to day, because it was up for 24 hours with broken. But yeah, I think some of that's going to eventually need to go into a CDN just so we can get the kind of speed and reliability options that I want. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because CDNs are like kind of your easiest win with performance, right?
It really depends.
If you're serving like, let's say you have the cheapest option, which is like probably some DigitalOcean droplet or something,
right,
shared server instance. It's probably hosted in the US somewhere in a specific region. If you need to serve any requests over a distance, like you're going to start to see that. So especially if your site has a ton of images, like, those pages will get bogged down, making the trip wherever it needs to go. And it's kind of incredible, like making the switch and seeing the improvements that you get. I definitely recommend it. It's not really that hard to set up.
I do remember, like, so my first gig was, I worked for this company that broadcasts auctions over the internet, right? Cattle, like livestock auctions, basically, right? And so when I first got there, most of what we did was just video and stuff. But then as time went on, one of the features that we added was we were like, hey, we're going to add these catalog images, right? Like, so, it would show you the information about, except that instead of text and things like that, it was just images. And it was super cool. Everything worked great in testing. We went live. Boom. Like our first auction, like, there's hundreds or thousands of people downloading images from our server all at the same time. This is back before, Nginx was out. We were still using Apache, and, it was not good. Yeah, definitely learned my CDN lesson there. Even with Nginx, it wouldn't have been good
I've
enough.
looked at some of the other CDN providers too, and a lot of them use FTP as well. I'm a little curious because I haven't like programmatically used the CDN, and For the images and stuff, that makes sense, but I've thought about also pushing like JavaScript and CSS files to the CDN after Webpacker or something uses them, and I haven't really looked into how to do that. So
my favorite thing to do is, and I know that there's a lot of analogous things out there. My favorite thing to do is just throw up an S3 bucket. You can actually attach like an AWS CDN, whatever they call their thing, in front of it, and it like pulls from the bucket and it like caches on pull. So you just pull a URL with the CDN stuff in front or whatever, and then that image gets cached after that. And I find that to be like like super useful, pretty easy to use, relatively easy to configure, especially with ActiveStorage. And then, you just don't ever think about it, and you just have a CDN for the rest of the time. But yeah, I mean, if you're manually uploading stuff, that's a little bit different. And
yeah, I like the idea though of pushing stuff into a bucket and then just having it automatically CDN the bad boy. Because for those that don't, I'm not going to assume, I guess, anyone's experience level here. So if you're not familiar with how a CDN works, effectively the way that it works is they have data centers all over the world, whichever CDN you're using, whether it's Amazon or somebody else. They have a CDN, or they have data centers all over the world. And so effectively they copy your file up to all those data centers, and then they usually have some kind of caching mechanism on the front end. And so when somebody requests the file the first time, it has to load it into the cache and then load the file. So they're slow. But after that, as long as it's kept active, in other words, as long as people keep requesting it, it'll maintain it in the cache layer and load it up pretty fast, because the cache layer is memory. And so it just, it just throws it out there. That's part of the deal. And then, yeah, the other thing is it doesn't have to go all the way around the world to get it right. So you don't have to hop blah, 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 all the way back to, the server in the US. If that's where it's being hosted, right? It can be, it'll hit somewhere that's in a country nearby if it's not in country itself. Having all that automatically managed, that seems really nice.
Yep. It also handles lots of requests all at once, when everybody's literally trying to all download the same image from your server, and, yeah. So
yeah, that's part of that caching.
Thousands of servers, or probably more, yeah.
You could always do Aaron Patterson's trick and drop a file in a gist and then use GitHub CDN.
Hey, folks, I'm here with JD from Raygun. JD, I have to complain. I mean, when I started in tech like 20 years ago, one of the first things they taught me was to use tail and grep to find the problem on a server. And I don't do that anymore. I have to say Raygun kind of solves that problem for me and picks up all the stuff that really is relevant to the request or whatever that came in. I'm curious, do you find that with kind of the oldsters like me a common thing, or?
I think there's definitely better approaches to solving some of these problems now. I always used to think of logging. I heard this great analogy once. It was like, logging tools are like coffins. Things go in there. They very rarely come out,
True.
And you feel safe because it's there, but there's so much noise. Understanding what's important and what's not takes a lot of effort. And I mean, often I talk about Raygun's crash reporting product as being like a black box flight recorder. Like, just tell me when the plane blows up, because I need to fix that really urgently, and that's been hugely valuable. You don't need to tail that.
That's true. Folks, you should just go get Raygun, and then you can see when stuff breaks, what matters. You can get it at raygun.com. They actually are doing a free trial, so go check it out.
I'm sure that somebody has over-engineered a solution doing that for real.
Yeah. Well, and it may be against their terms of service. So if you do that and you get in trouble, blame Valentino.
Well, for personal use.
Yeah. I definitely was not encouraging. So back in the day, or I shouldn't say back in the day. So Refile, right? So Refile was what, 5, maybe like 7-ish years ago? Okay, so more than 5, but less than 10, somewhere in there, right? Is I think when sort of like Refile like kind of came out. And there was this tutorial. What was the drag and drop file thing back then? It was not Dropbox. It was droppable something, whatever. It was a file upload thing where you could just like drag your files on it. It was super nice looking and all that kind of stuff. Or it was a JavaScript thing. So there was some tutorial that had Refile, that thing, and it hooked it all up with Stimulus. And that was literally my after Hello World, that was my second, thing of Stimulus. That's what got me hooked
Was that
on
Drop
Stimulus and Refile at the same time. Drop Zone, that's what it was. Yep. And that totally got me hooked on Stimulus right then. But it also just got me hooked on Refile because I was like, this just works smoothly. Like, it gives me all the post-processing things that I wanted without having the extra files of Carrier Wave. It worked better than Paperclip. I didn't have to go look up some weird, stuff to put in my rack things in order to get Paperclip to behave and, work correctly. Yeah, it was super awesome and great. And then ActiveStorage came out, also worked with Stimulus. Yeah, I don't really necessarily know that ActiveStorage has like some super great feature that the other things, didn't. Because like I said earlier, like I was like, whatever, it's fine. I've got this other stuff, right? But it just worked really smoothly, and there were just enough things wrong with everything else, and I was like really hooked on Stimulus, and this stuff was working really great with it. And so to me, like, that's its big selling point. It just works.
So do we want to talk about ActionText for a minute? Because I pulled that into, that was super easy. I can't remember, I think it was gem install, and then you run the generator and you're basically done. It pulls in the Tricks editor, which is Basecamp project, and it's pretty stripped down. Tricks is, but if you just need basic editing, I mean, it's kind of a nice way to go. And it works in kind of the same way as ActiveStorage. So it has its own table. You tell it that it has a text field in the model, and then it does all the things. And then it adds a rich text area or rich text field. I can't remember, but that's the helper that you use in your form builder, and just it sticks it in there and does all the things. So that's worked out really, really, really nicely. The only issues that I ran into were I copied and pasted a field and then turned it into a rich text field, and I left the form control class from Bootstrap on it, and that messed it up. But other than that, it's been great, and that was me. It wasn't ActionText, but it stores it all as HTML, and then you can just pull it back out, and it does all the sanitation and clean stuff for you. So I know that you can expand Tricks, but I haven't done anything with that. So
yeah, I was gonna say. So I'm curious. Like, my first question for you would be like, what JavaScript pipeline did you use to bring it in? Did you use?
I'm using
Sprockets,
Webpacker,
PropShaft, import maps. Okay, yeah, I remember that being reasonably easy. There's only like a couple lines you have to add in your pack file. I
don't think I even had to do that. I think I just ran the generator and it put it all in. I might have had to go hunt up the CSS file for it and add it to my pipeline for my CSS, but I think that was the extent of it.
Are you running your CSS through Sprockets?
No, I'm running it through Webpacker. So I think that was why. I think if I'd been running it through Sprockets, I think that's where it put it from the generator.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely some weird stuff that happens because everybody's on different like JavaScript pipelines. But other than that, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked if the generator detects if you're running Webpacker or have it installed or something like that. I don't know how smart that is, but it was pretty simple. So I was super gratified because I have gone through the paces with Tiny MCE, and try to make that all play nice with some of the stuff that I've put together. And I've had it work fine some of the time, and I've had it not work fine some of the time. And trying to track down what the exact issue is a huge pain in the neck.
It would be super cool if ActionText basically was like, yeah, you can use Tricks or Tiny MCE or like that would be super cool. But it's probably never happening because Tiny MCE is just way too old.
I could also see though if there are other rich text editors, that you could add a gem effectively that when you do rich text area or maybe you do like Tiny MCE text area or something like that, right? It would do the same thing, and it would then just save it back to the ActiveStorage table because that's all model based, and so it shouldn't matter once you send it back within the right parameters. So,
didn't Tricks actually kind of like talk about that, like about why the other WYSIWYG editors sucked, and then they were just like, it has all these problems, and so we we made tricks because we hated those problems or something like
Could
that.
be. We had Javin on
know.
I think it was on this show, and I think we also had him on JavaScript Jabber to talk about those particular issues. So
yeah, I vaguely feel like I remember reading that, but their homepage looks different now.
I'll put links to those episodes in the show notes.
There was an issue a while ago. Somebody requested Markdown support for tricks, and there's kind of a long-winded response chain, but essentially, tricks is focused on the text area element and augmenting it versus creating, a full-blown WYSIWYG editor replacement for the text area. And I think that's kind of where their focus is keeping it simple so that if you want anything kind of crazy that, uses Canvas or, needs any extended plugins, there are plenty of other choices out there.
I don't see any reason why you couldn't, unless I misunderstood your question and I could have, or your comment, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't just add a markdown field and then allow you to kind of switch back and forth. But if you want tricks to save it as markdown, I don't know. There are parsers that go both ways, so I don't know why you couldn't if you really, really wanted to.
I mean, you can do anything you want. The problem is we're always just like, oh, now I have to write JavaScript, and I'm just not interested in that. And so did somebody else do it for me? Oh, thank you. This is great. And then you dive into it and, there's a problem with it. And the first thing you do isn't, oh, let me see if I can fix this, because you don't want to touch that. You say, oh, let's see if there's something else.
Right.
Right. Like, I feel like that's just sort of like the habit. And I'm saying it like kind of facetiously and everything, but like, I'm not ashamed, really. Like, I love programming in Ruby. I really hate programming in JavaScript, even with ES6. Like, it's way better with ES6, but it's not as awesome as Ruby, and there's a very large difference in my developer happiness, and so when I'm troubleshooting, right, it changes my calculus, so to speak, right? Like, I'm more likely to go look for something that somebody else did in JavaScript, because I know that the amount of time that I'm going to spend trying to, one, figure out what the heck is going on, but then two, be like, wow, this is a really weird problem, and I'm have to come up with this weird solution because I'm mucking with third-party stuff usually, right? And I got to get it working. Yeah, it takes forever.
Yeah, my feels on that has more to do with, has somebody already done this, than whether or not it's in JavaScript. I mean, I don't mind diving into JavaScript if I need to, but if somebody's done the work, I don't see any reason why I should focus on that problem. I'll pull in their problem, save myself a crap ton of time, and then just move along to something else.
I think what I was really trying to say is that it weights that look for something else, or look for something that somebody else did, like, more heavily for me than it does in Ruby.
That's fair. I think a lot of that's going to be down to familiarity and, knowing how to solve the problem. And I think as Rails developers or Rubyists, we kind of focus a lot more on the back end type of problems. So we're just more comfortable living in that space.
I also have some trauma from looking at these like 3,000 line files for, the fourth method out of 6 that are very similarly named, which is the one that I actually need, and then tracing it back through like 8 other methods, and then just getting all angry because I'm like, this is useless abstraction here. And it took me forever to figure out what I needed to find. And now I found my hook that I need. And so like I can solve the problem, or I didn't find a hook at all. And so, and then I'm angry about that. So it's just, I think it's all of that kind of stuff that at the end of the day, like, makes me like want to avoid that until I know that no one else has solved my problem. Right. And then I go downstairs, make myself like a cup of tea or something, come back up, get as calm as I can, and then get prepared for the deep dive.
Makes sense.
I do like tricks. I do think that it's not, well, I mean, as you brought up, Valentino, it's not as full features as it could be. And that's disappointing in some ways. You can extend it, and that's super cool, but I also don't need WYSIWYG editors on every project. Well, now that I know that Markdown's missing, I would totally add that. I use Markdown for everything. Nobody else wants that. I should say, like, none of my clients want Markdown. I'm
Right.
always like, hey, this is super cool. Why doesn't everyone use it? But I know that it's never going to
Yeah,
sell.
I wrote a whole book in Markdown and then tried to hand it off to an editor, and yeah, that went over like a fart in church.
All of my contracts are actually a Markdown, and so then I like convert them.
Yep, I had to convert mine to Word.
And I stopped doing that. I stopped doing that a while ago, and I was like, all right, this is dumb. I'm converting it every single time. This is not scalable.
I've implemented so many WYSIWYG editors over the years, and I mean, every single time it's because you want like what Trix has, and then like some obscure feature that you want to integrate into it. And I feel like if you're going to head down that road anyway, then you don't need Trix. Right? Like the whole like bubble is like front end focused, like we've been saying, right? And anytime that like that you want to extend whatever the browser provides you, it always ends up like a nightmare. And from my experience with Rails, is like those nightmares are often like left until people are just like either abandon it or so fed up that somebody integrates it eventually.
Yeah, well, there was a contract I worked pretty early on. They had completely customized one of the JavaScript ones. This was one of the first ones that I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was CK Editor that they had. Anyway, it was on a website. Like I said, I was contracting on it like 12 years ago. And they had made it into their own thing, and it had its own little bits to it. And that was such a pain to dig through, because the problem that you get into, at least with JavaScript, you get into it a little bit with Ruby, but with JavaScript, I mean, it goes through so many files in so many places that just tracking the issue down is a giant pain. Or they've run it through some build tool, and so now it's obfuscated and all jammed into one file, and so then you're jumping around the whole dang thing to figure your crap out.
Thank you, Chrome, for Pretty Print. At least that saves us a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, Pretty Print, and if you have a source map, that's nice on the front end. Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast, and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story, about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv, and I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks and wrap this sucker up. John, do you want to start us off?
I did mention that tutorial earlier in this thing, so I'm going to pull that up or whatever. I was trying to find it earlier. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yep, so I'm going to throw that tutorial in, just because even if you choose to not use, refile or whatever, which is what I was using or whatever, I still think that, doing drag and drop stuff with drop zone, or now there's some other stuff that's, that looks nicer than drop zone and stuff. The same principle applies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great tutorial that kind of shows you how to wrap all that stuff in Stimulus. And I took that, and that sort of like launched my journey into Stimulus and wrapping other things, in Stimulus or whatever. And it went great from there. So I'll throw that in there. And then I don't have it with me, but I also have a Scotch pick for this week or whatever. So I'm recommending the Glen Scotia 15-year again, because I got it again and I'm enjoying it again. It's probably my current favorite Scotch still, after like discovering it like 4 years ago. So that's what I think about it. It behaves a lot like, it's about as smooth as like a lot of 18 years, and it's got, I think it's like, its big thing is that it has like a caramel note in it, so which is pretty unique. I mean, it's got a lot of notes. It's like a super in depth. It's just really good. It's got a lot of deep notes. But yeah, the caramel one's pretty unique. I really don't taste that in anything else. So, yep. Anyway, I got that. So those are my picks for this week.
Awesome. Valentino, what are your picks?
So my first pick, one of my coworkers, Nicholas Pufal, he wrote this article on how Doximity is using our GitHub Actions to kind of make our developer experience much more smooth with our GraphQL processes. So I recommend checking it out. Definitely some great stuff that he's been working on. Another pick I have is kind of just super fun. It's called DNS Toys. It basically exposes kind of like external services through DNS with Dig. So you can, dig for newyork.time at dns.toys, and it'll give you the time in New York, or it has weather or unit conversions. If you want to blow past all of the, TCP, UDP layer of the internet and get the fastest possible result back. It's an interesting way to do it, kind of hacking the existing DNS for that. And the last one I have is this tool called Do It Live. It's really cool. Basically, it lets you read a file of shell commands, and it replays the commands in a fake terminal session as you type just random characters. So it's used for presentations. If you ever need to give a live demo of something, you could just replay basically your session from a previous file, and it's pretty neat. So I highly recommend checking that out as well.
Awesome. I'm going to go in with my board game pick first, and that is Legendary Dark City expansion. So this is on the Marvel Legendary game. I think I picked it in the past. This board game clocks in on Board Game Geek at a 2.63 weight. So it's firmly in the casual gamer arena, right? So if you're playing Legendary, this doesn't make it that much more complicated at all. Anyway, really enjoy it. It has some of the, I guess, less well-known and kind of street-level heroes. So it's got like Daredevil and Elektra and some of them in it. And so, yeah, that's a fun one. Really enjoy that one. And then, I feel like I've kind of long-term picked ActiveStorage and ActionText just because I've found them really, really, really handy. And so I'm going to pick those. And then one other thing I'm going to pick, and this is, so I've been running for school board here in Utah for my local school district, and I had to get some flyers done. And so a friend of mine sent me the design she used for her flyers. And then I kind of, doctored it up and, changed some of the background and stuff. I did all that myself. And then I needed to print them, and I went on Vistaprint. And I've kind of had hit or miss quality with Vistaprint, but they were super cheap. And so I think I got like 2,000 flyers for like $50 or $60. I can't remember, but it was a really, really good deal. And they turned out really, really well printed. So I'm going to happily pick them as well. And then one last thing I'm going to just shout out about is that we do have the Summit Rails Remote Conf coming up in August. DHH is going to come do a Q&A. And so if you want to check that out, go to topenddevs.com/conferences, and it'll list it there. And that's pretty much all I got. So until next time, folks, max out.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN.
Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.